I know that you're very passionate around sports and exercise, and you've got some books, Guide to Thrive, Fitness After 40. So tell me, if I was your patient, what would you be telling me to do? So I'm someone, I've actually been postmenopausal since I was 34. So I've obviously, that's been a long time, but what would you be telling someone to do differently than what they've maybe been doing before? Obviously, people seem to focus a lot on aerobic exercise when they're younger and they're thinking about their weight, etc. What would you want us to do moving forward?
I think the fact that people have focused on so much cardio when they're younger is societal, not scientific, right? It's just an aftermath of the aerobics era, an aftermath of the running era, right? We were cardio for years. I was cardio for years, with very little attention being played to staying strong. So the way I approach this is to meet people where they are. It is frightening and difficult for someone who has not stepped away from the couch for any period of time, or who doesn't have physical activity as part of their daily life, whether they just never learned how, whether they've been so busy taking care of everybody else for 20 years, or whether they once were an athlete and then life takes over and they keep referring to the glory days. So even though I'm going to tell you how I want people to recompose their bodies, I recognize that nobody can jump to that. And I don't want people just to start when they're 50. I have millennial daughters. Actually, they're what comes below Gen Z? I have Gen Z daughters. I have millennial daughter. I need them to be putting down bone and muscle. And I talk about it all the time. If they do not know it, it is not because I am not preaching to them, because that is when we build our storehouses that from which we use, right? So what do I want midlife women to do now? Number one, you must eat an anti-inflammatory diet that's focused on 1 gram of protein per ideal pound a day. And it's doable. It takes some tracking. It is achievable with whole foods as well as protein supplement, high quality protein that contains adequate leucine. So that's number one. Number two, in that anti-inflammatory diet, we are not going to eat sugar. We are not eating added sugar. We are not eating white, simple carbs. It doesn't mean we're not eating carbs. We're eating fiber carbs, so you get 30 grams of protein a day. And it just is a shift. For instance, when my family wants to eat white potatoes, I am baking a sweet potato or yam, not with sugar and molasses, but just baking it because it's so fibrous if we're going to eat that kind of starch. So protein, complex carbs, absolutely no sugar, and the rest green leafy vegetables. So there's a lot more to an anti-inflammatory diet, but those are the easy things. People can only do a few things at a time. So that's number one. Number two, we have to lift heavy. So we have to provide the proper stimulus to our muscles that they'll actually build muscle fibers. If you lift a mamby-pamby pink weight 30 times and it causes no stress to your muscles, you're not going to gain any hypertrophy. You're not going to gain any power. So heavy lifting is, and I'm trying to make it simple. There's a range, but I've made it simple for my people. 4 reps, 4 sets of the compound power lifts, which is push-pull with your arms, push-pull with your legs, 4 times 4, which means you have to go pretty heavy if you can only do it 4 times. For the accessory lifts that support a compound lift, like let's take bench press. Bench press is a compound lift. The things that support it, biceps, triceps, lats, delts, rows, 8 reps times 4 sets. And that is kind of the pattern for lifting heavy. Now, we add to that, I have added foot speed and agility to that, because it's one thing to be strong enough to hold yourself up. It's another thing to have the foot speed and agility not to trip and fall down, because we die of femur fractures, sometimes because our bones are so brittle they break and then we fall, but most of the time we fall and then we break. So we need to build some fast twitch and agility muscles back And there's simple exercises we do with that so that we can stand upright. So anti-inflammatory diet, lifting heavy plus speed and agility. And then number 3 is, what are we going to do about our heart, right? We need great cardiovascular health as well as power and strength. To build cardiovascular health, we need to do 3 hours a week of base training, which is basically brisk walking, or 45 minutes of brisk walking every day, which is not that long. Twice a week, we need to speed it up and do sprint intervals, because that is heavy enough work that then causes things like our mitochondria to replicate, all the good, yummy things we need to do. So sprinting is not like we're seeing in the Olympic trials right now. Don't worry. People get freaked out when I say sprinting. Sprinting is a heart rate measure, getting your heart rate up as high as it can go for 30 seconds, followed by complete recovery. So when I sprint for 30 seconds, I then turn the treadmill down, and it takes me a couple minutes to recover. And you only do that 4 times. 30 seconds times 4. So those 3 things. Then if you want to get really advanced, you layer on VO2 max training, because that's a whole different subject. But not everybody can do these things because they've stepped away from the couch for the first time. So if you eat high protein, if you walk every day, and if you do body weight exercises, you can still lose weight. You can still recompose your body. And if you do that for a couple months until you feel comfortable, then you move up to the regimen I just talked about.
I actually had a listener ask me a question to ask you about these weighted vests that you can use for exercising. So they wanted me to know what you thought of those. And she said, what's the difference between wearing a weighted vest and then being told that carrying excess weight on your own body is bad for your joints? So I thought that was just an interesting question.
It is an interesting question. Well, yes and yes. True and true, right? So we know that heavy people have less osteoporosis than skinny, fragile people. We know that because they carry around all this extra weight. So the way to understand whether you need a weighted vest or not is to get your bone density checked, right? And if you have osteopenia and need every possible mechanism to build better bone, well, that could be an option for you. But the question is valid because we know joints bear 7 to 10 times body weight. And so when you're really heavy, that is one of the contributors to progression of arthritis. So true and true.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So we've talked a little bit about osteoporosis and osteoclasts and osteoblasts. So when do you think people should have their first DEXA scan so they know where they are with their bones in an ideal world?
I do, because I call 40-ish, whether you're 35 or 45, 40-ish, the critical decade for getting your proverbial, I could swear, but I don't know you well enough, together, right? You've got to get it together. It's time to adult. It's time to have a life insurance plan. It's time to have a will. It's time to have saved enough money so you're not starving. And it's time to start caring about your health. And so just like you need your first true physical, if you haven't gotten it before, you get your mammogram. I think you need a bone density because I have so many women showing up in my clinic in their 30s with fractures because they never laid down enough bone. Because we have had, in the United States, we've had this law called Title IX, which equalized sports participation across all educational levels. So for instance, I don't know if it exists in Australia, but if you have 50 boys playing high school sports in one school, you must have 50 girls or awful equal sports. So just to equalize play. Well, because of that, we have a huge generation of women who were athletes their whole lives. And sometimes athletes are amenorrhea, meaning they don't have periods for years because they live in a constant state of relative energy deficiency. And so they never lay down enough muscle. They never lay down enough bone. And so they arrive at 30 when they're supposed to have peak bone density, osteopenic. And so I think in this critical decade to get your proverbial shit together, you must get a DEXA scan, even if it's not paid for. Save your Starbucks money because, we can get them here. I don't know what they are in Australia. We can get them here for $99 at a gym. Some gyms have clinical DEXA scanners. And I don't buy the excuse that, insurance doesn't pay for it until you're 65. You must not need it. No, there's a difference between health prevention and disease care. At 65, you are going to be caring for disease. You're not going to be preventing disease.
And that's so interesting to me because I'm a family physician and I definitely see a lot of young female athletes and also a lot of dancers who are struggling with recurrent stress fractures and things like that. And so I know that's sort of slightly off topic, but do you think that they should be having DEXA scans?
There are many universities in the U.S. now that do DEXA scans on all incoming freshmen. And as the athletes progress. Now, do they do anything with that data? That's another question. But they do it. And the chairman of orthopedics at the University of Wisconsin her entire life's research has been on bone density in female athletes. And what her work finds is that the impact sports like gymnastics have much better bone density than the non-impact sports like swimming. And that's not surprising.
I think you'll agree we've had some incredible guests on the podcast already, and today's was no exception. I think there is so many nuggets of information I'd love to get out there. So if you know someone who would benefit from the podcast, please share it. That way more people can learn all about themselves. Remember, this podcast is all about you. This podcast and any information, advice, opinions, or statements within it do not constitute medical, healthcare, or other professional advice. Information is provided for educational and entertainment purposes only. If you have any health concerns, always consult your doctor.